afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Sigtuna Foundation. My name is Helen Kavanagh Berglund. I'm the Head of Sustainability at Sigtuna Municipality. On behalf of Sigtuna Municipality, I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this seminar about the Guest Writer Programme, and to have here also Iman Ghafari, who is our new guest writer. Sigtuna Municipality is very proud to be part of the Guest Writer Programme. In the municipality, we work a lot with what we call democratic sustainability, and that's about human rights, it's about participation, it's about freedom of speech, and I think that the Guest Writer Programme fits in very well with what we do in that area. We're very lucky to have here today also Pernilla Bergqvist, who is the chairperson in the municipality's Education and Children Committee. And Pernilla has been personally very engaged in making this happen and making sure that Sigtuna Kommun is a safe haven for a guest writer. We also have today our previous guest writer here, and we're very glad that you could join us too. So welcome everyone to Sigtuna Foundation, and like all of you, I look forward to a really, really interesting discussion.
Thank you. My name is Linderman. I'm the Executive Director of the Sigtuna Foundation. It's my privilege also to welcome you to this seminar about the work of ICON and the freedom of the press and the freedom of expression and what that means to society and to democracy. I would also like to express the gratitude we have and the thrill we think it is to be able to have a collaboration with the Sigtuna Municipality, between the Sigtuna Municipality and the Sigtuna Foundation in working with the refugee for authors. It was interesting. I was attending the ICORN meeting in Paris previously this year, and then one of the ICORN, not a writer but a musician, said that places where you send those who need a refuge should not only have a safe environment, but also a creative environment. And I think that that is what we're trying to do together, the Sigtuna Municipality and the Sigtuna Foundation. And I'm very grateful for that. First of all, it's my pleasure to introduce a little bit more our two speakers. Iman Ghafari is from Syria, and she's obviously the new ICON writer here in the Sigtuna Municipality. Iman is not only an author and a poet, but she is also a researcher and holds a PhD in English literature. She has worked a lot with gender-related issues, both as a writer and as a researcher. And I would also, since we have almost not met before, even though we've been here for 40 days, because I've been in other places. So in a formal way, I would like to welcome you to Sigtuna and to the Sigtuna Foundation. Björn Wiman is a journalist, but he also has a background as a publisher. He has worked for many years at the Swedish newspaper Expressen, but since 2010 he's the chief editor of the cultural affairs section at one of the biggest newspapers in Sweden, Dagens Nyheter. In this conversation, I would like us to do three things. First of all, we would like to learn more about you, Iman Ghafari. Since you are the new ICON writer, you are not only passing by, you will be with us for 2 years. So it will be very, very interesting to learn a bit more about you and your background and who you are. Secondly, I would like us to talk about the general significance of the freedom of speech, the freedom to publish, and the freedom of the press, and what that means to society and to the development in society. And thirdly, I would like us to reflect a little bit about the work of ICORN cities and the whole idea to create safe havens for authors who are restrained in their work in their home settings. So those are the three main parts of this session. So, first of all, Iman, you are relatively recently arrived here in Sigtuna. Who are you?
My name is Iman, and I come from Syria, and I had my PhD in English literature from Cairo University in 1999, and my dissertation was about the quest for identity in the poetry of Sylvia Plath. And I translated this my dissertation from English into Arabic, and I translated.
Can I just ask, do you hear, or should she have the mic closer? Keep it closer to the mic.
I translated some of the works of Sylvia Plath from English into Arabic, and I had many publications of literary publications, publications in literary magazines and referee journals. And here I also left Syria in 2011 because of several reasons. I went to Cairo and I spent about 6 months in Cairo, and then I received a fellowship to be a guest researcher at the University of Amsterdam in the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies. I gave some lectures in the university and I presented some papers in European universities. And then I was a guest researcher in Utrecht University in the Netherlands. And after the end of all my fellowships there, I had a new grant to be a guest writer here in Sweden. And so I came here. So I moved from one trip to another. It's an endless journey.
Could you tell us a bit more about what the reasons were? You said you left Syria for a number of reasons. Could you explain a bit more?
Yeah, it's just I had before I left, I was involved in a personal battle or a personal war against the university in Syria, because I was suspended from teaching for several years, and I was not allowed to get any income or even leave the country. So I was a sort of a hostage in Syria, and it was difficult for me to get a passport. And so I had to raise the case against the university. I resorted to the state court, and during that time I had many problems. The situation became very unsafe in general. It was just every day there were explosions and bombs, and so I had to leave. But I did not think that I would stay for a long time. I thought that I would just go outside Syria and spend a short time to regain my energy and come back, because I got used to fighting in Syria, so it became very difficult to stay abroad without being involved in that process of fighting. Yeah.
You said it was in 2011, right?
At the end of 2011, but the case that I raised against the university, it was at the beginning of the year, and I spent a year with going to courts. And I wanted to write a book about it. I will call it The Year of the Lawyer, because I had many problems with the lawyer also.
How did this relate to the uprising that took place in Syria in 2011?
Yeah, it's just, personally speaking, I did not see any demonstration in Damascus. I lived in Damascus, so I heard about what was going on outside the city, because the city was controlled. It was surrounded by checkpoints, so it was difficult to know what was going on the outskirts of Damascus. I had a friend who lived there, and she lost her house in the outskirts of Damascus.
That's interesting. You lived in Damascus, and you did still not really know what was going on in your own country.
Yes.
That sort of indicates something about the media climate in Syria at that point.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because even the electricity was disconnected most of the time, and the channels, it was difficult to catch other channels other than the Syrian one. So I did not know what was going on actually. I once called my friend in Egypt, and she told me that there are demonstrations in Cairo. I did not know about them.
Did you have a lot of information about the sort of what's so-called Arab Spring that has gone through other countries before that?
Yeah, I heard about them, but it was not very good coverage of news. It was just a very small part referring to a demonstration. You can't recognize that it was that big. You just feel that it was a small thing happening, and you don't recognize the damage that was done during that time. It was difficult to do that. Yeah, it's just actually because I was also in a sort of exile in Syria. it was not the experience, the feeling of exile is not new to me, because in Syria I was already exiled, and I had the sense of being isolated from what was going on in this.
Could you explain that a little bit more, when your feeling of being in exile in your own country?
It's just not being able to participate in activities, in public activities, or to present your opinion. It was, though I had the chance to write articles in magazines in Syria Today and Forward, but they were in English. So it was, I was sort of isolated from the community in Syria. From the there was no civil society actually in Syria.
And why do you, how do you yourself understand why you were sort of so restricted, why you ended up in this situation?
It's just, that was an assumption for me, that I wrote about lesbian issues in Syria and in Arab countries, in Arab cultures, and I published about that. I guess that was one of the reasons, and about being out, because I was outspoken in that regard, and in asserting my identity and talking about it as an identity.
But that's very interesting. You say you had, it was your assumption that was the reason.
Yeah.
So you did not really get any real sort of declaration of what the reasons were from the authorities?
No, they created other reasons actually. It's like they did not want to say that this is the reason, because this will be a confession that there is a lesbian identity. So for them, it's, they just said that they considered me resigned, though I did not resign. And that they created other excuses. It's just because when I when I went to court, I realized that they did not mention any reason, any particular reason. They just said that we don't want her in this university.
At that time, did you consider yourself primarily as an author or primarily as a researcher and scholar at the university?
As both, actually, because I used to write poetry in Arabic, but I did not publish my poems at that time. I published research more, so I was more of a researcher, but I was also a writer, and in different ways, just both of them. I don't know how to compare. Both of them depend on writing, research and writing.
And it might be obvious, but why did you have problems getting published in doing the writing that you did in Syria?
It's not, the world of publication is not open. Most of my publications are not in Syria, they are outside Syria, or in magazines that are written in English, because they are not easily accessible to the reading public. They read in Arabic, so it's not easy for them to understand what I write about.
Yeah.
So it was also a means of isolation, or a way of isolating me from my language.
So what was the final thing that made you take the decision that I have to leave my own country?
Well, I said that I did not want to leave my country forever. It was not a choice.
You said you were thinking it would be a shorter period. What was in your mind when you?
I was thinking that there will be the situation will get better, and I can find new ways of fighting in Syria. That I will be more creative.
Yeah. And what was the path that took you from Syria to Egypt? I mean, how was that opening made for you?
Yes. I can't answer that actually. I don't find any answer for that question.
Okay. Yeah. But in Egypt, you came to the university environment.
No, I was also isolated from the university environment in Egypt. Okay. It was almost the same as in Syria, but it was a subtle way of discrimination. In Syria, it was more difficult. But it's not easy for me. It was not really easy for me to do anything in Egypt. So I had to come to Europe and to do something here. Yeah. And when I had this chance to travel, it was a good chance for me.
Yeah. Björn, do you have any questions for Iman?
Yeah, first of all, I would really like to welcome you here to Sweden and to Sigtuna. I'm especially happy that I met one of your compatriots this morning, the Syrian author Samar Yazbek, who has actually been here in Sigtuna for 1 week as well, working. And I'm very happy to welcome you as well to our country. I'm also very happy that both you and Samar belong to the minority among the Fristadsförfattare. Do you have a common concept, English concept for this word?
Guest writer.
Guest writer. You're a minority among guest writers, since you are both women as well. Minority actually are men. So my reflection on this, obviously, is that the system with guest writers globally was founded due to the fatwa against Salman Rushdie in 1989. And obviously it's based on the conception that art and literature has some kind of special position in society, that you as a writer, or you might be an artist as well, have a mission that is more important than, let's say, a baker or a banker. We have to be honest to face this, and I agree. Not everyone does, though. The system with guest writers is not uncontroversial, not even in Sweden, not even in the capital Stockholm, where there is a small part of Stockholm called Huddinge, where they recently denied a proposition of a guest writer, claiming that this protection that this system offers is arbitrary and discriminatory, because it doesn't comprise bakers and bankers. I think it's unfair that you as a writer should have a special position. This tells very clear what it's all about. Writers have a special position, should have a special position, but the same position as journalists. They act as our stand-ins, as our witnesses. There's a saying that if you witness a global conflict, you may see a big group of people leaving the area. That's the population, obviously, fleeing for their lives, trying to protect their own security and the security of their children and their families. And then there's a small group of people going in the opposite direction. And who are they? Well, those are normally the journalists, the truth finders, those who are there with the risk of their personal lives to try to tell us about what is happening there. And that is an important thing. I think this distinction between writers, journalists, all those who are working for the free word, and those of us, or those of you who don't. And I think we have to protect this distinction in opposition then to what the board here in Huddinge does. That's my first reflection.
It's interesting. I mean, the board in Huddinge is constituted in a democratic system, and still their decision in this case seems to oppose the basic values of democracy. What is the significance?
Not certainly. I mean, there is this sense of suspicion against threatened authors and artists have always been there, if you look at this historically. And I've studied this a bit since I've been engaged in some of these cases, and there's almost always 4 factors that are present in the case of an author or an artist who is threatened to his or her life. The first claim that normally is at hand is that the threatened artist's work is aesthetically bad. This was the case with Rushdie, for instance. Many of his colleagues, many critics, said that the Satanic Verses was a lousy novel. That's the first fact. The second one is that the threatened artists have deliberately provoked in order to be famous and make money. This was also the case in the Rushdie case. Thirdly, that the threatened artist, by his or her work or manner or behavior, is posing other innocent people in danger. This was also the case in Rushdie. This was the case with the threatened Italian author Roberto Saviani, for instance. This is also the case in the Swedish artist Lars Vilks, to take three examples. And four, that the threatened artist is a bad person, or antipathic, or have other severe problems with his or her personality. These four factors are almost always present. I don't know if they were present in your case in Syria, in the propaganda against you.
There was no propaganda against me.
No,
it
but
was subtle, that's not direct.
No.
Nobody said anything about me.
But this is the underlying assumptions, the gossip, the streams that go under. These four factors, if you study cases of threatened writers or authors, are almost always at hand.
Yeah, but these things were taught to me by my friends in Syria, that they used to say, why do you put yourself at risk? Why should you fight and talk about things that you know that they are taboo in Syria? So just be safe, be on the safe side, and you will be, everything will be okay. You can just stay and work, and nobody will create problems for you. But the more you talk freely, the more you will face problems. Yeah.
The underlying thing under all this is that keep quiet. Don't create problems. Don't create problems for yourself, thereby creating problems also for us.
How would you, Iman, describe the situation in terms of the freedom of expression and freedom of press in Syria at the time when you were leaving? What was it like?
There was no space for freedom of speech or freedom of self-expression. No, it was controlled, totally controlled. The media was controlled. Though there were some chances to express opinions or freedom of speech or free opinions on foreign newspapers, for example, or journals, something like that. But the situation was very closed in Syria. It's I don't know how to describe it, but it was a sort of a prison.
Yeah. What would you say, Björn? Do we have freedom of the press and freedom of expression in Sweden, in our part of the world?
Yes, you should have to say that. I mean, we have some problems as well here, and but overall, I'd say we have. There are subjects and parts of the world that are more worth discussing, I'd say. Although there are problems, for example, in Sweden with the local press now and their situation as it proposes a quite severe problem to our society as well in the long run. To take an example of the importance of this and the threats to the free world that you described, does anyone in here have any recent reports what is happening in Libya, for instance? No, I wouldn't say so. And why? Because it's too dangerous to go there. There aren't anyone who dares go to Libya because it's too dangerous. I listened a couple of months ago to the American reporter Janine de Giovanni, a very experienced foreign correspondent who has dared to go everywhere in the world. She has been in Syria in recent years as well, which is also enormously dangerous. But when faced with the proposition to go to Libya, she said, no way, I don't dare do it. Because they get, as a person there from this part of the world, you get immediately kidnapped. And that was the worst thing. So, well, this is a problem, of course. We don't get any reports from Libya. So anything that happens in Libya goes on without under our horizon. We don't notice. They can do anything there, and this is if you generalize this problem, you immediately see what it's all about. The situation in Syria is similar, which leads to that we have sometimes not the correct picture, and if we don't do this, we also lack the possibility to prevent similar situations to go on in other parts of the world. If there would have been a possibility for a free press, for instance, in Libya, on an early stage, we would have had reports as citizens, our authorities, the institutions of the world that are set to manage and to create a situation where you can prevent very dangerous developments. They could have acted, but since no one is there to tell us, we couldn't.
If you even look at the situation in Syria, what would freedom of the press, for instance, have meant in 2011? As Björn says, I mean, there is a source there for prevention of the bad development to go on. But what do you think would have been the potential if there was more freedom for the press and for expression at that time?
Well, actually, the situation would not have escalated to become a war if there had been space for freedom of speech. At least journalists and writers can create a space for people to express their opinions through words and through writing, not by fighting.
One very current example now, obviously, also is Turkey, where we can see this. Turkey now is literally a prison for writers and journalists. And this is with a reason. I mean, the person governing Turkey now, Erdogan, wants to emphasize the polarization, the animosity between persons in his country. And without a free press, he can do that. He can do that much more easy than he could have if there would have been a functioning system of journalistic reports, if there would have been free writers and so on. That's the same situation that you described in Syria in 2011. Who knows where Turkey will be in 5 years?
My writing is about feminism and feminist literature and lesbian issues. They are not even mentioned in Syria or something. This is a taboo subject. So it's not about politicizing this topic is very dangerous. That's the issue. It's not about the practice or love. It's also about politicizing feminist issues or lesbian issues. Yeah.
It seems to me that the freedom of the press and the freedom of expression is regulated by two major systems, if you will. One being the political system, but the other being the financial system. I mean, what's taking place? I'm thinking about the reference you, Björn, made to what's the name of the Media?
Mitt Media. There's the owner of 82, I think, local newspapers in northern Sweden. For those of you who are not familiar with it.
Yeah, because there has been a discussion and sort of a scenario in that context saying that they would have to fire 75% of all the journalists that they have, and that would be due primarily to financial reasons. And that, of course, as you pointed out in that article last week, would imply significant, or would have significant implications for the stability of democracy in our country. So there are threats both on the political scene and on the financial scene.
Yes, I mean, I don't want to, as we say in Sweden, paint the devil on the wall, måla fan på väggen here, but I mean, even the smallest actors in this ecosystem of information and the free word have very important roles to play. And I mean, if you look at what happens when whole society comes into shadow, when no one is there to tell, what happens in this shadow, where very dangerous things can happen. There's a very good ground for lies, for propaganda, for for this kind of polarization to grow there, which wouldn't happen so easily with the genuine coverage, with people there to tell stories, with reporters to check upon that you and your colleagues in the city's board, that you do your job properly and so on. I mean, all of us are used to this. We can see an example of the opposite now in the US, where, I mean, the basic function, the press, have been taken by propagandists, by megaphones often from the extreme right, that have taken this place that was before covered by I mean sensible media outlets.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you in that regard. Like in most societies, or patriarchal societies, the personal has to remain personal, and that's a way of also suppressing women in the private sphere, and they can't talk about what goes, the violence that can take place against them. So and that's the problem. It's like when you want to turn this personal thing into political thing, that becomes obligation in such societies. Yeah.
If we turn over to the whole idea of creating these safe havens for authors that are restrained in their home context, on a personal level, what does it feel like for you, Iman, to have been selected to be a guest writer in Sigtuna?
Yeah, it feels good. Thank you, of course.
I would also like to be a guest writer in Sigtuna. I think it's beautiful here.
Yeah, it's good. It shows that some people care about promoting freedom of speech and democracy, and that gives me a sense of hope that the situation in Syria and in other countries, in other parts of the world can become better. That's positive, I guess.
So
and I am an asset here to you, of course. I will contribute to the literary society, and I will exchange views with other researchers and writers.
But that's what you're saying. It is so true, and not to be forgotten. I mean, if you speak about the system of guest writers, if you want a really good argument, I mean, you should take just this argument, and you should take it in serious. It's not for fun. I mean, this is not a thing that we do to be do-gooders, but to be nice. This is something that contributes to our society, to our public sphere, to our literature in this case, to our experience, to our vision of the world. And you can see this. I mean, you can see this throughout the history of literature. I mean, what would Paris have been without all exiled artists going there in the early days of modernism? Paris would have been nothing. What would Sigtuna have been? Without Iman today.
So I'll be a symbol of Sigtuna. Thank you.
But you, Iman, you've been in exile sort of for the last few years.
Yes.
What's your impression of being in that situation, having to work in another context than you were planning on to work in?
Yeah, it was, at the beginning it was very difficult. I was very desperate because I thought that I became very detached from what was going on in Syria and from my friends. But then later on I started to make use of my being in exile and to turn this experience into a positive one. And I wrote poetry in Dutch language. I learned the Dutch language, not very good, but I managed to write some poems in Dutch. And I feel better actually in Sweden more than in the Netherlands. I don't know why, but I feel better here.
We like that. If we look at the icon construction, you mentioned, Björn, previously that it's not an uncontroversial thing. You have touched upon that already, but what could you say a bit more? What is the resistance against the idea of doing this fundamental work for authors in difficult situations.
Yes, but I think I touched upon it, as I said. I think one reason, obviously, is the suspicion against artists and writers in general, and artists threatened and persecuted writers and artists in particular. That's one reason. The other reason that we didn't touch upon so much is obviously the sense of the strengthening in today's world of nationalism, chauvinism, the strengthening of the concept of borders, the weakening of the old idea of cosmopolitanism and the citizen of the world, the thought of the citizen of the world, that this is basically grounded upon. And this you can see, I mean, obviously this you can see everywhere. You can see it even in Huddinge or in Gävle here in Sweden, but you can obviously see it in the rise of Donald Trump in the US. You can see it in Hungary, you can see it in Poland, you can see it in France. You can see it in this polarization that is taking place globally now. That is working to put persons against persons. And that, I would say, is the main reason too that this system now is facing some resistance everywhere.
Yeah, it differs from one person to another. When it comes to threatened scholars or threatened writers, not all writers really want to leave their homes and become refugees, or so it becomes, maybe it's just for some people it is an imposed situation, and for others it could have been a desired one. And that's there needs, I guess there is a need for a distinction between those who really want to become writers just for the sake of privilege or anything like that, or those who were forced or who were put in a position where they don't have any other choice.
Is it a problem that it's only a commitment for 2 years? I mean, it has been discussed by people that the whole construction is sort of unstable, because what would the person do when they've done those 2 years, and then should they go back to be at risk in their own context or so forth? Have you been thinking about this issue at all?
Actually, I thought about because in Holland I had also a fellowship from an organization which is called Scholar Rescue Fund, and then I got another fellowship from Scholars at Risk. And now here I am a guest writer for threatened writers. So I'm moving from one fellowship to another, and I did not plan to have this life to go from one fellowship to another. And these fellowships could be helpful for a situation that would last for a short time. Like, you know, that there is a short period of being at risk, and you know that the scholar after a year can go back and lead a life. But when there is an ongoing war and you don't know when will this war end, it becomes very difficult to have a future or to think about a stable situation for yourself or for myself.
There was a very sharp situation when I listened to you, and when you're in relation to your question about periods and time. One year ago, last spring, there was a blogger from Bangladesh who wanted to visit Sweden to take part in a congress for the free word, for free speech in Sweden. He was, as many of his secular colleagues in Bangladesh, living under death threat from extreme fundamentalists, and he applied for a visa to Sweden but was denied the visa because the authorities thought that he might try to stay. Well, obviously he would have been right to try to stay because he was killed. And this is a very powerful, I'd say, example and symbol, and a very powerful dot of blood and shame on our behalf, of the Western world. This is a very clear example of how the situation I was trying to describe, with the suspicion, with the strengthening of the borders, not today, not even allows us to act in a civilized manner, not even allow people in your situation to come here to partake in normal discussion and conversation with their colleagues on a congress of free speech because we are so suspicious that this person might try to stay. It's shameful. I get furious when I think of this still.
I don't think that the Western world is responsible in that regard, because what's going on in other countries like Bangladesh or Syria is very big. It's beyond the comprehension of the Western world. There are many problems, and if borders, just talking from a neutral perspective, if borders were opened for everybody, it will become a disaster. So just millions of people would want to flee their countries. In Syria, all the Syrians want to flee Syria.
I mean, obviously you have to take measures. You have to take measures, but with the situation I was describing now with this blogger from Bangladesh, I mean that's an absurd situation. But I think this puts in point exactly what we're talking about here. You have, despite the world going through a difficult situation, you have to keep your decency, and as a civilized country, you have to stand for that. And in this case, we definitely didn't.
We're going to conclude by having Iman to read a poem written especially for this event. But before that, one question to both of you. Is there a crisis for democracy in the world right now that relates to the crisis of freedom of expression? I mean, obviously you mentioned Turkey, and we know that that's a very difficult situation. Syria, but in a sense, I mean, also the article about the situation in Sweden for financial reasons, but look at the presidential election in the US. Is the US that sort of tries to be the example democracy in the world. What's your impression and what's your vision for the future in terms of democracy, human rights, and freedom of expression?
I am not really optimistic in that regard. I feel that there will be more restrictions of freedom of speech at one point or another. Even in the Western world, there could be some restrictions on freedom of speech. I feel that the control of freedom of speech is moving to Europe, and I guess it has to do with the mentality of people or changing ways of thinking. There must be a way of standing against this way of controlling people in this way.
It's interesting that you say so, because many of the things we experience in Europe today are kind of odd. I mean, the discussion in France about burkini, for instance, that you're supposed to show a significant amount of skin if you're a woman and should be on the beach. I mean, how could that discussion ever appear? So, I mean, there are lots of issues surfacing also in Europe that you would not have expected them to do.
Yeah, but it has to do with male-oriented ways of thinking. Like it's all ways of control are directed against women and how they should dress and their ways of thinking. So it's about controlling women in both cases, whether it's for freedom of bikini or burkini. In both cases, they have to do with women's bodies and how they should wear or what they should wear.
But in this case, it's in a nation that's founded on the idea of freedom.
Yeah, in Paris, it's a contradictory thing. It's hard to find a way of finding a sort of a compromise between freedom of speech and other ways of life and different ways of living.
Björn, your vision and fear.
Well, obviously not so bright either. I mean, with the perspective that a hate mongerer against the media, like Donald Trump, could be the next president of the United States. I mean, that's truly apocalyptic perspective. I mean, he uses exactly this. He uses the sense of he uses hate exactly against people like me, people like you, and perhaps people like you as well, to gain and to fuel his voters, and he's succeeding. And that's a truly dark perspective. I mean, the situation here in France that you discuss with the Burkini, that's also very, very dark, and it poses very big threats on. And that's the greatest gift that the extreme fundamentalists in Daesh and whatever could have had. That was this Burkini ban. The greatest gift they've had in a long time. Because it goes to show what they claim, that we in Western Europe hate Muslims. Which obviously don't, and that's my hope. I mean, the majority of people all over the world, despite the situation that we read of, that we watch on TV, and despite this, the majority of the people in the world are still decent people. They want to live in peace with their families. They want to live and let live. And there's still just a minority voting for Donald Trump. There's this less smaller majority doing horrible terror deeds. There's a small majority still that are dictators. So the majority of us, people, are still decent. That's my hope.
Iman, let's hear your poem.
Yeah, I wrote this poem for this occasion, and it's entitled Reflections. I loved freedom that she became part of me. I once asked her, why are you so lonely? My female lovers are behind walls and bars, she said. I usually look at the mirror and ask myself, why can't I have a place in my motherland? I wait and wait, but no answer I get. And the war had not been over yet. Freedom is so charming. Some men wanted to marry her or bury her. She refused to stay in their prisons or graves. So she lived alone on her own terms. Afraid of her, they said, her charm needs to be controlled. They denied her existence in the first place. Then they waged a bloody war in her name, and they challenged her lovers while beating them on their heads. Is this the freedom that you seek? I turn the mirror away from their hateful scene, and I write, my freedom is more loving and peaceful than you think. Far in the distance, a wounded child cries, I will tell God everything.